Monday, Wednesday, we're done.
Whoa.
Oh, that's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
I'm pretty excited. I feel like I've been going full tilt this semester. Y'all too, right? That's what semesters feel like. So I'm ready.
I would be too if I didn't have so many exams back to back. All of my finals are Monday and Tuesday.
I have 2 on Monday myself, but then I don't have another one till Wednesday, and that's it for me.
I haven't had any energy since mid-October.
Maybe you should get out in the sun more. All right, let's talk about what we need to do today. So we're going to continue on with our Predator-Prey PowerPoint. And I told you I'd talk probably an hour 15, and then give you some time to get started on this homework, start reviewing. It's got your Predator-Preys on there, just everything's on there. Not a lot of them, it's like one problem of each thing. And so we built that oscillation at the top of this page last week. We did a bit, or last Monday, on Monday. We did a better job in that we put our trend arrows on there, and we talked about what was making the actual cross in the middle and all that good stuff. And that's the actual oscillation. This is what the Lotka-Volterra model predicts. This one we also should know is a terrible depiction of predator-prey interactions, because prey should greatly outnumber the predator, but it does have the right ups and downs. And as we were talking about on Monday, I did try to explain here and there that this model is simplistic. The only thing that's controlling the predator and keeping them from growing exponentially is the abundance of prey. And the only thing controlling the prey and keeping them from growing exponentially is predation. And so it over-influences the influence of predators on prey populations, and really vice versa as well. It ignores things like genetic changes in the population. It ignores immigration, but that's pretty common. Like that particular one, we ignored those in all of our population models for the most part. It ignores cover availability, which we're about to investigate by looking at what some of the scientists have done to try to study this model. And it ignores if it's hard or easy to find prey, especially when prey are scarce. And then there are other problems we'll kind of run into as well. And so it's been a while since I have said this, so I'm going to say it now. And that is, these models are our starting point, and then what we do is we modify the models to fit the environment that we're working in. And so the importance of these models, even though they are simplistic like this one, is that they act as a starting point. Okay? All right, so we're first going to start with some classic experiments that were done in the 1930s, by a guy named Gauss. This Russian just did all kinds of things with protists. We also, I think we looked at that. We did competitive exclusion, so we probably looked at one of his experiments where he grew paramecium together, and one of them excluded the other. That's also the same guy. He just liked working with paramecium and stuff for some reason. So he decided to see if he could, kind of the same ideas we had before. We're working in a very simplistic environment with a test tube with food for the prey, essentially. Could he get them to follow Lotka-Volterra's predictions? Could he get them to oscillate? And so in the first experiment, he established a population of prey, in this case, Paramecium caudatum. He really liked his paramecium. In the test tube, there's paramecium swimming around, and there's some food for the paramecium, and that's it. Just paramecium swimming in fluid. So then what he did is he added Didinium, which is a predatory species. And then what do you think happened in this simple experiment? More specifically.
The paramecium.
Yeah, Didinium was like Pac-Man, because there was no place for the prey to hide, and they're like, nom, 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 and ate all the paramecium, and then what happened? And then the Didinium died, right? Right. So since the prey were unable to hide, the predators ate them all. And after the prey were all consumed, the predators didn't have anything to eat, so they died. However, he could get this to model, to show the oscillations as predicted by Lotka-Volterra, but in order to do that, he had to have immigration. Okay, remember that's left out of the model. And so his point, which is kind of his point. And so what he would do is, as the prey population declined, he would add more prey, And so by manipulating the amount of prey in the environment, he was able to get them to oscillate as predicted by Lotka-Volterra. So in this experiment, immigration of prey. On the next slide, we have his results. And then a picture of him. So here's Gauze. You ever wonder what he looked like? And you have the number of individuals over time. And the bacteria on here is just food for the paramecium because they do have to have something to eat. And so the actual focus is on the relationship between the paramecia and the didinium. And you can see that it's not clear that he's adding more didinium, but that's what he did to get it to oscillate. So it looks something like this. So then he decided to set up a more complicated experiment. So we're still talking about gauze here. And he introduced sediment to the bottom of the test tube, just some sand at the bottom. And the sand created pore spaces that were large enough for the paramecium to get into. And so now we have a refuge or shelter that the paramecium can use and hide from the predators. And so he did the same thing as he did before. He let the paramecium get established in the test tube. And then he added the didinium. And then what do you think happened?
They all died again.
Again, more specific.
Fewer, like they took.
And actually, that's not true. I know, it's tricky on that one.
Not all of them died because some were able to hide from predators.
Okay, so they were able to eat the paramecium that didn't have hiding places. The rest of them hid in the sediment, and the predator died. Right? The didinium died. Right? And so when the predators were added, they ate all the prey they could catch and find. The rest were hiding in the sediment. They went extinct. And then once the predator went extinct, what happened to the paramecium?
They were able to.
They had a population boom and they win! The prey won! So they didn't all die. They repopulated the test tube. So how could we get this one to oscillate? What now? Yeah, this one you're going to have immigration of the predators. And if you add predators at the right time, as the population gets too large, add a few predators, it'll knock it back, then you can get it to oscillate as predicted by Lotka-Volterra. The graph that I have in here doesn't really show the oscillation, it just shows that the prey won. So it shows the first part of the experiment, and not what he did to get it to oscillate. Often these simple experiments always make me go, why can't I think of simple experiments like this? Because it's not that difficult, and he made some good points. And his work was foundational for people who went on to study it, like our next guy. All right, we're gonna skip ahead to 1958 to a classic experiment by Huffaker et al. And this one is crazy. Not only would I never think about it, I probably wouldn't be that interested in doing it, just because my interests aren't there. You throw in some birds, maybe. But he wanted to try to make a more complex experiment. He thought that gauze was on the right track by adding sediment so that the prey had places where they could hide from the predator to kind of preserve them so they didn't go extinct, for example, like in the first experiment. He decided to use herbivorous mites and predatory mites. And so he's using little bitty teeny tiny things that run around. And his environment is going to be made up of a tray of 40 cells. Okay, and so he had 4 rows with 10 cells. So it's a 4 by 10 grid. And what he did was he placed oranges in some of the cells, and he placed rubber balls in other parts of the cells. And then he could rearrange the oranges and balls and come up with different types of environments by doing that. That was at least his original plan and what he wanted to do. And so he could control the pattern of food dispersion in the environment. And so here's a picture of one of Huffaker's experiments set up at the bottom of the page down here. where you had, I can't tell from this black and white picture which are balls and which are oranges. Actually looks like those are the oranges because they're the only ones that really look different. And he would have several of these, replication. So he'd have several of these going at the same time, right? In the same pattern, and he would look to see what would happen. And so the first experiment we're going to talk about, he decided to have a concentrated food source. And so he put 4 oranges together and then surrounded them by rubber balls. And then over maybe in another section had 4 oranges together to make a big patch of food, which is going to attract our herbivorous mites and concentrate them in those patches of food. And since he concentrated the prey in these locations, what do you think the predators did? Yeah, once they found the oranges where the herbivorous mites were living, they just decimated them, right? And so in this particular case, the prey drove the extinct after about 25 to 30 days. So this did not work very well. And so for experiment 2, he decided maybe he shouldn't have a concentrated food source so that you're concentrating the whole population in a small area, making it easier for the predators to find them and eat them. And so this time he's going to alternate orange, rubber ball, orange, rubber ball, orange, rubber ball across the whole habitat. Because that created a scattered food source, it acted as refuges in his model, and it took the predators longer to find the prey. And so this particular model lasted about 36 days, and so it extended it. Adding habitat complexity is getting this to run a little bit more similar to what you would predict. This is where he goes insane. No, I'm just kidding. This is where he's clever. He's actually really clever. And so experiment 3, he decided that increasing complexity increased how long my model worked. And so what if I increase complexity again? And so he placed oranges in all of the cells, but covered them in wax paper so that only 1/20th of each orange was exposed. I know, I'm just trying to let that sink in for a minute. How much work that took. And calculating the surface area of the orange, figuring out how big your square, that's our circle at the top needed to be. And then when we look at it, I've got a picture of it. He's got like these little grids written on the top so you can count your mites. And plus mites aren't very big to start with, to count. All right, so the 2 populations in this particular case, in this most complex experiment that we're going to talk about, went through 3 oscillations as predicted by Lotka Volterra, and it did eventually crash. I mean, it's a limited environment, right? There's no immigration of either prey or predator or anything like that. And so eventually it did crash. But he did get it to go through 3 cycles before it did that. So in experiment 1, we had immigration of prey, Gauss experiment 1. Gauss's experiment 2, we had immigration of predators. And then what Huffaker's stories told us is you needed to continue to increase habitat complexity if you want it to get to cycle the way it's predicted by the model. Right. So here's a picture of his orange. And so that's what they did to each orange. They wrapped them up, taped them so they couldn't get to the rest of the orange. Drew a little grid on the top to make it easier to count your mites. And then you had 40 of those in each one of your experiments. I'm guessing Huffaker didn't do that so much as some grad student and undergrads he paid did that probably, right? Here's another picture depicting it. In this particular case, you got a couple of them running at the same time, and it shows his results down here at the bottom, the 3 cycles he got to run. And then I have one more, just the actual, this is the cartoon, this is the actual experiment, picture of the actual experiment, how he had it set up. What now?
I like how it's referred to as a universe.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's a universe. I would call it microcosm, but that might have become popular like in the 80s and 90s. So I've seen some really cool microcosm types of projects where you look at things on very small scales. One of them was looking at, I think one of the most clever ones we read in grad school, we had a journal club, and we meet once a month and talk about an article. And one of the ones I thought was the most clever, they wanted to look at corridors and habitat patches And so they took these big mossy boulders and they would cut the moss off in different patterns and look at the invertebrates traveling between the different patches. So clever and so much easier than doing it on a large scale where you're looking at, agricultural fields and forest patches and things like that. But I don't think my brain works that way. I'm like, let's build boxes, put owls in them. All right. Here's a field example. And so all that stuff was in the lab and trying to figure out what's affecting predator-prey populations. Here's an actual example that's very similar to what Huffaker was trying to do. And so prickly pear cactus were introduced into Australia in 1839 as an ornamental plant. Australia, the majority of the continent of Australia is arid, and so this would be something that would grow well there. But without natural predators, it took over about 60 million acres of farmland. That's a pretty invasive plant, right? And also having huge economic impact on the people living in Australia. And so to combat the cactus, they introduced a South American cactus-eating moth, which I have a picture of sitting on a prickly pear cactus pad at the bottom of the slide. The moth multiplied, spread, and whenever it got into an area, it would destroy all of the cactus until they got it down to really low numbers. And then the moth would, of course, die back after that a little bit. And so what happened, I didn't have that up there. So the moth multiplied and spread, that's what I said, decayed and destroyed the cactus until what you had left was like a little patch of cacti here and a little patch of cacti here, not 60 million acres of cacti anymore. And so by creating these sparse, widely distributed patches of cacti, it made it harder for the moths to find them and destroy them. And so it kind of naturally created the habitat heterogeneity, like Huffaker was trying to create with his orange arrangements. This is a natural example. And so in the areas where the moths went extinct, the cactus were released to grow. And then once the population got large enough, the moths would find them again and knock that population back down. Whoops. And so you ended up getting this nice predator-prey situation, completely artificial in many ways, right, in Australia, because prickly pear cactus nor the cactus-eating moth were native to Australia, but followed what was predicted by Locke and Volterra. All right, any questions about the field example? All right, next up we're going to talk about predators and how predators respond to prey populations, and a little bit about predator adaptations. And then we're going to talk about, because by the time we get done talking about predators, it's like, how are any prey left? But then we'll talk about prey defenses and how they elude predators. All right. The first thing we're going to talk about is how they respond to differences or changes in prey density. So in the cactus and the cactus moth example in Australia, we saw that the cactus moths increased when they found a patch of prickly pear cactus, and then they decreased when the prickly pear cactus was rare. That's where we're at so far. What this is really getting at is, what do predators do as prey density increases? And there's really, let me get them both up there. There's really two options. One, they can just eat as many as possible. They can gorge themselves. That's a functional response. Or they could have a numerical response, and that is the population can actually increase. And so on Canvas, I have an article there about woodpeckers that you may have noticed. I believe it's published. Pretty sure it's published. And it is an article specifically about functional and numerical responses. It's kind of interesting. Woodpeckers is one of the groups of birds that has actually increased since the 1970s, whereas the vast majority of birds have decreased. So if you had ornithology, we talked about the 3 billion birds lost. And so many groups of birds have declined. Woodpeckers have actually increased. And one of the reasons they've increased is because of things like the pine bark beetle and stuff like that, infections getting into trees. And so it's not necessarily a good reason, because those things are changing our ecosystems as well. So it's talking about what is, I don't remember right now whether it's about the pine bark beetle or a different or whether it's like burned and they had some insects moved in there because there were a lot of dead trees. But basically you had a big burst of food for woodpeckers, and they wanted to know, did the woodpeckers basically maintain their territories and just eat more or focus on that particular prey item, or did you have woodpeckers move in and increased reproduction in the area? And as always in ecology, we put them as or, but it's really either or, and you see a little bit of both most of the time, right? All right, so functional response, eat more. Numerical response, you increase your number of predators. So we're going to start with functional responses, and then we're going to talk about the numerical responses. Ecologists also apparently aren't very creative, because we're just going to call the functional responses type 1, type 2, and type 3 again. We don't give them different names for whatever reason. For type 1, the number of prey taken per predator increases linearly. So we're going to see a straight line. And animals are going to typically show this type of functional response only if they don't have any handling time. And so this is going to be like Didinium and Paramecium, when Didinium was like Pac-Man. There's nothing really slowing it down. Handling time can take many different forms. To give you some examples, because going forward we'll have some handling time. My favorite example of handling time are the crows that eat the mollusk, because I actually got to see it in Alaska one time. It was so awesome. And I was with non-ecology friends, and they had to drag me away. But the crows were going out into the water, and they were picking up some type of clam, and then they'd fly over to the parking lot and they drop them on the parking lot to try to get them to bust open. They're not the only species that do that. That's just the only one I've seen do it. But that takes time and energy to do that. That's the handling time. Another example is if I had 2 bowls of candy up here. Got more excited? Depends on what's in my bowls, right? All right, in this one we have a M&Ms. I've opened up a bag and I've poured the M&Ms into this bowl. It can be your favorite kind. Currently my favorite kind of M&M is the M&M cold brew. I don't know if y'all tried it, caramel cold brew. That's my favorite. Did y'all even know that existed? I should have told you, because now Walmart won't have it when I want.
I think you could do good.
That's really good. And then in the other bowl, I'm going to put Werther's Original in the wrappers, the hard candies, right? Okay, and so if I put you onto this M&M bowl, how many M&Ms could you eat in 5 minutes?
A lot.
They're caramel cold brew. I could eat a bunch. How many Werthers are you going to be able to unwrap and suck on and even, because that's not what you do. You wouldn't really chew it, right? How many of the Werthers are you going to be able to eat in 10 minutes?
Less.
Much less, right? There's much more processing that has to take place with the Werthers than the M&Ms. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about M&M situation right now. That you can just toss them in your mouth and just keep going. They're abundant and you can do that. And so that, I don't know what Anna is. Trout eating on I guess. Hatch of mayflies. I'll go ahead and change it since I see it. It's probably been there for a while. So trout eating on a bunch of mayflies is an example. The graph now, remember this says it increases linearly. Now we're going to do the graph on the next slide. And notice that it does linearly to a point, and then it flattens out. All right. What's causing it to flatten out at the very top there? They're full.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're satiated, they're full, right? And so what we have on this graph, let's look at it more closely. We have the prey density. And so the prey density as we move along this way is increasing. And then we have the number of prey taken per predator. So how many prey are they eating? And as the prey density increases, the number that they're taking per predator increases linearly, because that's type 1, until they all get full. And so we'd have to figure out what number that is at which we would get full. Apparently of M&Ms. All right. Any questions about this graph and what it represents? It's the more simplistic one. Not super common, but there's definitely examples, like when you do have a big burst of insects and things like that. All right, the second one is type 2. And what we're going to add in this time is our handling time. And so the time you spend pursuing, subduing, unwrapping, digesting, all of those types of things are going to slow you down as to how fast you can eat. And so that's going to change the shape of our curve. It's no longer going to be straight because it limits the amount of prey you can get per unit time. It doesn't necessarily change how many it takes to fill you up, though. So you're still going to get full at some point. And this is the most common functional response described by ecologists when you go out and actually look at predator-prey relations in the field. And so our last one, we straight up, and then we got full. All right. This one, we're moving more slowly, and so we're going to start eating, and we're going to slowly get full. But at the top, we are going to flatten out again, wherever that happens to be. So here we have our prey density increasing, number of prey taken by the predator per day, and it's just at a slower rate, which causes the curve. So type 2, we add in handling time. All right, for our last type of functional response, we get to type 3. And this is where we're going to add in refuges. And so we're getting into the sediment at the bottom of the test tube, or the oranges that only had a little bitty 1/20th of it showing. And we can also add more than one type of prey, because that's more realistic. We're probably not just going to prey on M&Ms and Werthers. We probably are also going to have Reese's Pieces. Oh yeah. We'll get some stuff in there for y'all who aren't on that scale. My sister's a sugar candy person, so Sweet Tarts maybe, or Smarties. So we will usually eat more than one type of prey. At low densities, the prey are going to be better protected because there are lots of places for them to hide. There's not much competition for those places to hide. And so they're going to be able to escape predation. They're going to have safe sites, like the rabbits in my yard when my dog chases them, unless they're in the fence. No safety there. In fact, a lot of times they hit the fence and knock themselves out. The animals themselves, the predators, are often going to ignore uncommon food and focus on things that are abundant, which leads us to a concept called prey switching. And so you're going to eat the abundant prey item. It's easy to find, it's easy to capture because it is so abundant. And then as you eat it, you're going to decrease its numbers, right? And so as you decrease its numbers, it becomes harder to find. And so you start looking around and you're like, oh, that tastes good and it's super abundant. I'm going to switch to that. And you're going to eat it down until it gets into low numbers and you can't find it. And then you'll switch to whatever's common again. It might be the one you were eating before because it had time to bounce back. But because of prey switching, it means that the population of prey can get down to a point which we call the threshold of security, in which it becomes so uncommon that the predators kind of ignore them. Not really ignore, they just can hide well. Any questions about prey switching?
What would happen if you introduce different types of predators, though, and they you got two different predators and they're going after the same prey?
So the prey would go down faster, and then they would switch. They might switch to the same thing. They might switch to different things. At least that's what the models would predict. That's what I would say too, for the most part. So if it becomes, and this model, remember we're modeling, right? Because the reality is, if that prey population is below the threshold of security, which this model is saying, then the predators will ignore them. But if the predator is sitting there and one of them walks by, it's not really going to ignore it either, right? It's going to be like, oh, I remember that. That's delicious. Okay? All right, the other thing that's related to this is this idea of search image, which I think most people are at least somewhat familiar with. Because when you're helping somebody find something, if you don't know what it looks like, it's way harder to find it, right? And so one of the first things you'll ask if somebody says, can you help me find thus and so, is what does it look like, right? Which is exactly pretty much what search image is about. But I usually like to point out this point that there was a Nobel Prize that went to 3 animal behaviors, which was highly unusual, that went to, into the area of animal behavior, and they were very foundational. One of them is the guy who did search image. He got the Nobel Prize. This was part of what he did to get the Nobel Prize. Anybody know who came up with the idea of search image? His name was Tinbergen. Does anybody know who the other 2 were?
Lorenz.
Yep, Lorenz for
Something.
he did imprinting. He's the one that had the ducks following him around. That was Conrad Lorenz. And
M1?
the guy who discovered the bee dance. That was von Frisch. He discovered the bee dance. And so they won it in the same year together, all for animal behavior, which was kind of unusual. And all of them had very foundational things that we still talk about in classes like this. What Tinbergen did, like I said, search image was a part of it. It's a phrase he coined. But a lot of what he did had to do with how do animals locate things, I guess. And so he was the one that would find a wasp's nest, like a yellow jacket that nests in the ground, and he'd put a circle of stones around them, and they'd let them come and go for a week or something, and then he'd move the stones over a foot, and then he had video of the wasps coming over trying to find the hole because they were using those stones as a landmark and they couldn't find their hole. That was part of what he did. Yeah, that's clever. Again, that's a pretty clever way of addressing that. All right, so if you don't know, a search image is you eat something and you're like, wow, that's delicious, and so you look for more of that. That's really all it is. In this case, in the case of predation anyway. And so once they realize it is delicious, then they have an easier time finding it. They might actually be seeking it out. They might start to learn its habits and where it hangs out, right? You learn a lot about it. It becomes easier for them to find, and that will tend to drive their populations down to the threshold of security in this case. The ones that are being eaten above the threshold of security, and so when the population of prey is high, when we're higher than the threshold of security, that's often referred to as compensatory. I know y'all talk about that a lot in NRM, so what's compensatory?
It's not taken away too much from, it's not additive, which I guess is not really a definition.
Does it decrease the rate of survival for the overall population? Or that, I guess, if you think of it annually?
It takes out what kind of would have died anyways.
Right, so a lot of times they're taken of the ones that would die or weaker in the population. But also, you gotta remember the prey population is gonna have environmental limits just like the predator. And so it's gonna keep them from overusing their environment as well. And so if you have a really high prey population, then that surplus, the ones that are taken are often sick or weak, but that surplus is also using resource which might be in excess of what the environment has. And so it's keeping the prey population at a more sustainable level. Okay, does that make sense? So that's what it's trying to do. All right, let's put all of this onto a graph. Okay, and so on this graph, we have our prey density increasing again, and we have the number of prey taken by the predators, but we have a squiggly S-shaped curve. And when we had our S-shaped curve for population growth, we said that the population growth started slow at first because there weren't very many individuals, right? And they had to find each other and reproduce, and then you accelerated. It's kind of the same idea here, except that when you have very low prey size, prey population size, what's happening is they are very good at hiding. They're hard to find. The predator's not likely to be sitting there and wouldn't walk by its path because they're uncommon, and so they are generally just not going to be captured. And when that happens, they will be able to reproduce because they don't have a lot of predation pressure, and their population will begin to increase. And then at some point along in here, when their population is increasing, they'll become abundant enough to get the attention of the predator. And so this dashed line right here represents the threshold of security. And so by definition, if the prey density is below this line, they are somewhat protected by predation because their population is so low that the predators aren't encountering them. They have lots of hiding places, so they're just not being eaten very often. That doesn't mean zero, because this is how often they're being taken. right? So that gets to your question. And then when you get above this, then it's a free-for-all on the prey, basically. And so you have accelerated a steeper curve when the predators are taking them until they are satiated, so it flattens out at the top. And then the last little note I have on here, which apparently at some point I added a lot of words to, but basically on this side of the graph, what we're saying is this prey that are taken on this side of the graph would be considered compensatory, and basically controlling the prey population, keeping it where it needs to be for environmental limits. All right, any questions about that? All right, so that's our 3 types of functional response: type 1, type 2, and type 3. All right, we'll have different names for the next group. Okay, so functional response, again, is how fast they are eating the prey. So as prey density goes up, they eat more prey. As prey density goes down, they eat fewer prey. Numerical response is the actual number of predators in the environment. The actual number of predators in the environment. We're going to have 3 types again. Let me get all 3 up here. There we go. Trying to make sure I didn't overstep. Okay, so I don't have a separate slide for each one. I was just making sure. So our first one is a direct response. And so as the prey density increases, the number of predators increase. Keeping in mind that that could be through either reproduction or immigration. Either one. And so they call their buddy, "Hey man, you won't believe how many prey we have over here. You won't believe how many cold brew M&Ms are running through the forest." And I'd be like, "On it! I'll be there in 10 minutes. Then we have no response, which means as the prey population goes up, the predator population just stays flat. Which might seem kind of weird, but it could just be that they've got what they wanted or they're eating something else. There's a lot of things that could lead to a no response type of situation. And then I think the weirdest one to think about is an inverse response. And that is, as the number of prey go up, the number of predators actually go down. Not super common, but can you think of a way that that might happen? So let's say we have an owl sitting in a tree during the day, and there's only a couple of sparrows around. Are they really going to be able to move an owl? Nah. Are they even going to try? No, if it's just 1 or 2 sparrows, they're not going to try. What if they have a whole flock? That's when prey density has gone up now, right? Will they harass the owl then? Or the hawk? Heck yeah. The exception to this is if it's a kingbird, then it's going to harass anybody everywhere, so it doesn't matter. But well, you see mobbing is what I'm getting at, right? You see mobbing behaviors. That is prey attacking a predator and removing the predator from that area when that happens. And so that's the type of situation that gets you an inverse response. And so the prey rise up, begin to protest, and they run the predator off. All right, so this one puts them all on the same graph. And so here we have prey density again. So as prey density is increasing, then the number of predators per unit area is over here. And so anywhere above this line, so we could actually even go higher if we wanted to, but anywhere above this line is going to be a direct response. I think that's probably intuitively the most easy to understand. There's more food, and so that is going to attract predators to the area. They're going to, according to our predator-prey model, they'll use the prey to have more predators, right? That was the main thing, controlling the predator population. Here's the no response. Like I said, there's a lot of reasons why that might happen. Territories also would be one, right? If you have a highly aggressive species, it wouldn't matter if the number of prey is going up in the area. They're not going to let anybody else in, right? So that's another way that you get a no response. And then finally, you get like the mobbing type of thing. So anywhere below this line is going to be that inverse response. All right, any questions about the 3 responses? Okay, so most of the numerical responses involve an increase in reproductive effort. But if you'll remember, this is built into the Lotka-Volterra equation because the birth rate of the predator depends on the amount of prey available. Right? So this is built into Lotka-Volterra. Because reproduction takes time, there is often a lag that takes place. We've talked about lags before. Between when you have an increase in prey and then some type of numerical response. And even though most of this involves increasing reproductive effort, if it is immigration into the area, there's still going to be a lag. It just wouldn't be as long as if you have to wait to have a pregnancy or lay eggs and wait for those to hatch or be born. Now read that, I'm not going to test you over it per se, but that Woodpecker article is super readable, it's easy to read, it's short, and it is specifically about functional numerical responses. Take a look at it. If it's not posted, somebody tell me. It's there, it just has to be published if it's not. So now we're going to talk a little bit about hunting tactics of predators. And I'm going to tell you, this lecture is extremely general. So if you've had classes that talked about predators in more length than we are today, they probably are going to get a lot more specific. So we're just going to break it down into 3 general modes of hunting, and they're going to be familiar. We're going to order them according to what takes the least amount of energy to what requires the most amount of energy. So we're going to start with the sit and wait predators, also called ambush predators. And that's the one that just kind of sits still until the prey come by and then they grab them. On this slide I have one of my faves, which is these are antlions. This is the larval stage of the antlion. The adult stage is winged and flied around, and I never recognize it. I'm always like, what is that weird thing?
It's like something like a wasteling or something.
Yeah, something like that. It's big and doesn't look scary. It doesn't have big mandibles like this thing, or I guess it's what's called. Anyway, biting things. And what these do, they also I probably like it because it's like a Sarlacc pit in Star Wars, which would also be a sit and wait or ambush predator that they throw Han Solo in. And they threw Boba Fett in, but he survived, if you watch that. But what it is the ants will crawl near here, and then they slip on the sand and they fall into the pit, and they can't crawl their way out fast enough to get away from these jaws that grab them and then they eat them. I have hundreds of these in my barn at my house. And so one of my favorite things in the summer is I'll mow my yard and then I'll back the mower into the barn. And when I back into the barn, the tires will throw dirt into their little holes. And so I'll sit on the tractor and you'll see them shoveling. You'll see them throwing the dirt out. You don't see them too much. It's pretty fun.
When do you have them?
What now?
When do you have them at your barn? Like what
I mean, the pits are there all the time.
Right.
I'm going to assume in the wintertime that they're not active. I don't know what they do. But all summer, they're out there shoveling. Making sure their pits are good. I mean, it's a terrible place for them to be. But it also tells you there's a lot of ants around my barn, probably. Probably need to clean out my barn some. Who cares? So this is just one example. Frogs, like bullfrogs. Bullfrogs just kind of sit on the bank and wait for anything small enough to get in their mouth to walk by, right? Then they'll grab it. I've seen them sitting there with leopard frog legs sticking out of their mouth where they've grabbed leopard frogs. There's just no telling what they'll grab. Alligators are some nice sit and wait predators. Y'all have any others y'all like?
Vipers, spider tail vipers.
Okay, snakes, some snakes. All right, the next mode, stalking, which is a deliberate form of quick attack. So you're going to walk really slowly and stealthily and then strike. Okay. The idea of stalking is that you're not going to have a long pursuit, right? Because I told you we're going in order of increasing energy investment. And so this is a little bit more energy than sitting and waiting for prey to come to you, but not as much energy as chasing, which of course will be the last one. And so these are fun to watch to me. especially when it's my cat stalking my dog, that kind of thing, right? So cats are big stalkers. Herons are stalkers. You see them move really, really slowly, and then their head moves remarkably fast when they go and they pierce their prey. And so search time is great, pursuit is minimal, and they often are taking, it says they often take smaller prey, but herons are like what I said about bullfrogs. If they can get it in their mouth, they're gonna eat it. They eat rabbits, they eat gophers, they eat snakes, they eat a wide variety of things. Anything that they can spike with their bill and then swallow whole. Y'all have a favorite stalker besides Scout, my cat? Oh, I do know. My favorite one is the foxes that listen to the mice running underneath the snow, and then they jump way up in the air and they pound into the snow. That's probably my favorite.
I think I consider like jumping spiders to be stalkers.
I don't like jumping spiders. They freak me out.
They're so cute.
No, they move ridiculously fast and they jump around. It's weird.
Do the snowy owls count?
What now?
Snowy owls count? Because I know that they would listen.
Yeah, I guess owls in general, like hawks in general, they're sit and wait anyway. Well, I guess hawks would be more sit and wait, and then they have a short pursuit. And, you know, like I said at the onset of this, I'm dividing it into 3 categories. There's overlap between these 3 categories, and it does not encompass everything, right? It's not really the main topic of our course by any means. And so the last one in the 3 categories we're doing is the search and pursuit. And so this is where you don't search for very long, but your pursuit time is much greater. You run after them. You got to be fast and nimble or have good tactics. And so I've got the cheetah, which is probably what comes to mind when you think of pursuit because they are so fast. Got a peregrine falcon up there crashing into a pigeon over 200 miles an hour at the time of collision. Fastest animal on the planet. And then my favorite one was in my head until we had those 2. Oh, my favorites are the African wild dogs because they do pursuit, but they're also really smart about it. So when they start running towards the impala, for example, they'll break off and have flankers. And so they have tactics associated with it when they hunt in groups. It's pretty cool. So that's search and pursuit. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the adaptations and strategies that the animals use. What kind of face is
I
that?
didn't know that they opened their mouth that wide.
Yeah, that's how they get all the water through there. And so some predators, they eat things that are really, really small compared to their body size. Classic example is your baleen whales, like humpback whales, and they open their mouth ginormously wide. And then they're catching things that are just teeny, 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 tiny little things. These are krill. And the water's going to go through their baleen, and that's going to filter out the krill from the water. And then that's what they eat, but they eat them in large numbers. It's very similar to what, since I'm a bird person, what the nightjars or goatsuckers do, things like chuck-wills, widows, whippoorwills, and nighthawks. They open their mouth up really ridiculously wide, a lot like this whale, and they fly around catching insects, many, many insects in their mouth at a time. Some predators, like I already just mentioned with the African wild dog, they develop tactics of taking prey much larger than themselves by working together. Some of them might use a venom, like snakes, shrews, spiders, and some of them hunt in groups. So I already told you about the wild dogs that are pretty cool. But people don't think about birds hunting in packs. And there is one species that occurs just west of us. We'll occasionally get a couple of them in Tennessee during the wintertime. It's the Harris's hawk, which is depicted in the picture down here. Notice that these have tresses because these are trained hunting hawks, falconry. They're not falcons, they're actually hawks, but falconry is the name of using them to hunt. And these things they like to hunt rabbits as a group. And while they show them in the air in this picture, they actually run on the ground through the brush after the rabbits. And they use tactics similar to wolves and wild dogs and things. It's just kind of crazy to think about. Also, birds running around on their two legs looks weird. For whatever reason.
Think of the little, what are the owls that they like have been doing a lot of management of, and they take them by their burrows and they like work them up and then go to put them back in their burrows and then let them go. And then he's like run back in their burrows and then like.
That's gotta be burrowing owls, because they got really long owls. Really long. They have really long owls.
Yeah.
They have really long legs.
They're really cute.
They're adorable.
These are all my other like t-shirts.
We have one burrowing owl that overwinters in Tennessee, over in East Tennessee on private property. You're not allowed to go onto the property, but there is one place that is high enough. It's like a hill of gravel. I've never actually done it. I've seen burrowing owls elsewhere. So I've seen it elsewhere. I don't have a strong, I've got to also see it in Tennessee, which some people do. They want to see it in the state, right? And they'll go up on that pit of gravel with a spotting scope just to see this burrowing owl down on the private property. I haven't heard whether it's back. I guess it might be a little bit early, but the last 2 or 3 winters it's been there and they've been watching it. But not real common in our part of the world. Some other adaptations for hunting include echolocation, which is where you put out little high-pitched sound signals and your body knows how to interpret how fast it comes back to you to determine what's going on. So bats and dolphins. I like the etc down there with nothing else at the moment. That's cool. Some hunt using hearing rather than sight. And so owls have offset ears that allow the sound to hit them at different times and allow them to triangulate much better than us who have ears that are more symmetrical. Some of them have adaptations that allow them to do things like fly without making a sound, and owls are great at that. They're really amazing. However, they're very noisy landers. And so you might not realize they just flew over you, but you probably will hear it when they land on the tree. That's been my experience so far. They don't have to be quiet landers, because if they land on top of you, it's too late, right? So you don't have to worry about it too much. Some of them have facial discs, which is the owls again. They have a facial disc, but some of the other birds of prey do as well, including the harriers, that allow them to locate things underneath the grass. We could also put the pea trails. Some of the birds are able to follow pea trails by sight, by ultraviolet. Others use smell, all that type of stuff. And so if you have all of these adaptations for hunting, what chance do the prey have? They're just out of luck, right? Well, they're not. And so we're going to talk about prey defenses on Monday. That's going to be a nice light topic. So let's do the prey defenses on Monday. Let's work on our practice homework. I think that will put us doing community ecology after Thanksgiving, which would be great. And then we should finish up no problem in the first hour of Wednesday after Thanksgiving. In the second hour, you can finish up your homework and check it and all that kind of stuff and get the rest of it done. And so I brought the calculators. As always, you can